Welcome everyone to our session, Collaborative Leadership for System Change, Case Studies and Key Patterns of Effective Collaboration. Good evening from Berlin, and good day to many of our speakers calling over from the other side of the big pond, and any other time zone that our audience are joining in. Good day to you too, good evening, good morning. Great to have you here. My name is Florian Rutsch. I am a co-leader of the Europe Fellowship Program, where I have the pleasure of working with our speakers here today on collaborative learning experiences. And I'm also delighted to be welcoming our moderator in a moment. My role here will be to represent us in the chat on the Swapcard platform, where I invite you to please share your questions and reflections. And also, I would love to welcome you to briefly mention where you are calling from. I see someone has already done that. Thank you. And we'd love to hear from you as we get started. What word comes to your mind when you hear collaboration? We hope to hear from you in the chat. I will be monitoring it and be present there with you. And for the rest of the session, I will be in the background and available for any questions you might have to channel them towards our speakers. Now, with that, it is my pleasure to show you our wonderful panel here and hand over to Lucette Hyams from Ashoka, who's leading our global learning and development work, who's been working also with Co-Creative in partnership on many initiatives around collaboration, actively practicing and delivering a range of leadership and well-being workshops. So I'm delighted to have Lucette and hand over to Lucette as our moderator for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Florian, and welcome everyone. It's great to have you here. Welcome to our speakers as well. It's just great to see. I'm just looking at all the people signing up from Poland, US, Belarus, Hamburg, and so many parts around the world. Welcome all. And I want to check if there are some words, Florian, that people are writing around the topic of collaboration. The one word, what does that mean for them?
Yeah, we see quite a few here. Connection is coming up. Scrolling through the chat here. Creativity, sharing, constructive power, I see here. These are some of the ones I see coming up so far. Please.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, all of that and more. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Before we go into it, let me provide a little bit of background. For over 40 years, Ashoka has been igniting the power of social entrepreneurs around the world. And we have over 4,100 in 90 countries. And throughout this time, the evolution of our vision has really expanded to understand that to address a global systemic issue, it's very important to have social entrepreneurs, and it's also very important to do so in an ecosystemic way. If we want to address systemic issues and create a more equitable world, better world, everyone has to play a role, has to play their part. So we have been committing to helping build a world where everyone is a change maker, where everyone is in their own power to contribute. And to make this work, we also have started to learn and recognize that we need new skills, new ways of being and behaving that we need to develop. And some things we actually need to unlearn. But some of the things that we want to develop more on are competencies like empathy, like awareness, being more intentional, systemic, doing teamwork, that is more collaborative and actually transcends the limits of our organization. Basically, a way of creating system change that harness the power of the collective to sense and help to bring about the solution and systems that we have not even imagined before, and that not only one person could do, but together in that collective interaction we can actually imagine. So key questions that are emerging for us: who do we need to be as leaders? What type of leadership is needed? How do we collaborate with others? I mean, we know that collaboration is key for large impact, but we also know that this is one of the most difficult endeavors, particularly if we're looking at engaging in multi-year, multi-stakeholder, cross-cultural engagements. How do we understand each other? How do we accept each other? How do we create together without replicating the mistakes of the past? And so, what are then the success factors of collaborations? How can a network leverage its full collective power and unfold its potential for greater impact? We are exploring these questions, we're working on it, and we're discovering many things as we speak, and to the extent that we are able to work with others. So, what we expect you to learn here in this conversation is the following. Our speakers' experiences with concrete examples and insights about collaborative innovation for system change. We hope that you also get to see key patterns of success and failure around collaborating, as well as practical tools and frameworks for you to collaborate. And so, without any further ado, I really would like to introduce our speakers here. Gary Cohen. Welcome, Gary. Gary has been a pioneer in the environmental health movement for over 35 years. Gary has helped build coalitions and networks to address health impacts related to climate change and toxic chemical exposure. Gary is co-founder and president of Healthcare Without Harm, and he's also been awarded the Champion of Change Award for Climate Change and Public Health by the White House, and he's also a MacArthur Fellow. Thank you, Gary, for being here. We also have Heather Equinas. Heather is a partner at Co-Creative Consulting, where she is a collaboration doula, a visual facilitator whose work is in service to a simple core belief: that the health and well-being of people are inextricably connected to one another and the planet that sustains us. Heather has facilitated impactful multi-stakeholder collaborations that we will learn more about today. She and her family live in Wyatt land on the Redwood Coast of California. And we also have Ross Gaskin. Welcome, Ross. Ross launched Co-Creative Consulting, where he helps people who don't know each other and often don't even like each other solve complex problems together. He is creating conditions and frameworks that support efficient and meaningful collaboration across deep sectoral and cultural boundaries. Prior to launching Co-Creative, Ross was Chief Business Officer of Green America, Managing Director of USSIF, and he also funded the Green Business Network, which was the first network of triple bottom line businesses in the US. Welcome all, it's just great to have you here. So what we will do is we will first hear from Gary about his experience and insights about collaboration. And then we will hear from Ross and Heather, and then open up for questions, reflections. Please do use the chat to share all of that, whatever is coming to you in thinking and inquiry, that we will be bringing it to our conversation. So Gary, please go ahead. Great for you to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucette. I'm going to tell a short story of healthcare without harm over the last 25 years and draw out some lessons that come to me around collaboration based on that story. So for about 10 years, I was working with community groups around the United States and outside the United States, fighting against toxic chemical threats. they knew they were being poisoned by incinerators and chemical factories and dumps and other industrial facilities. And they were trying to fight back to defend their kids and to defend the health of their communities. And in the mid-1990s, we learned from the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States that hospitals were the largest source of dioxin emissions in the country, in the United States, and a significant source of mercury. And dioxin is linked to cancer and learning disabilities and infertility, and mercury is linked to brain damage, especially in developing children. And we said to ourselves, how are we ever going to turn our society around if the very sector that's committed to healing, the healthcare sector, is itself a major polluter? So we said we have to engage with the healthcare sector. We have to educate them around the links between climate and health, and chemicals and health, and food systems and health, and bring them onto the side of a broader movement around environmental health and sustainability. So when we started incineration, there were about 4,500 medical waste incinerators in the United States. A decade later, there were less than 100. When we started, mercury was the gold standard for measuring in healthcare, mercury thermometers and blood pressure devices. So we started with one hospital in Boston. We said, would you be willing to eliminate mercury thermometers, get replacement ones, and start to educate your patients about and your workers around the dangers of mercury? And they said, we'll do that. And then we got all the hospitals in Boston to follow suit, because it was a really great thing for them to begin to educate their community about. And then we got the hospitals in San Francisco and then Chicago. And then we partnered with the American Hospital Association. And together we worked over the course of a decade to get 5,000 hospitals to agree to eliminate mercury. And then we went after the pharmacy chains, and we got one of the pharmacy chains. And then we went and got all the pharmacy chains to stop selling mercury thermometers. Because people were calling from their homes and saying, hey, I just dropped my mercury thermometer. What should I do? It was the place where poison control centers were being flooded with this issue. So within 10 years, we pretty much eliminated the market for mercury thermometers in the US. And then we went to Europe. And because Europe still has a functioning democracy, we were able to pass policy within 3 years, phasing mercury out of healthcare by linking with the Green Party and large hospital systems in Europe. And then we started again with one hospital in Buenos Aires and one hospital in Manila, and then got those to model the change, and then got those cities to pass legislation to ban mercury thermometers, and then got those countries to ban mercury thermometers, and then partnered with the World Health Organization and won a global treaty phasing mercury out of healthcare by 2020, the Minamata Treaty on mercury. So what happened because of that is that the hospitals and the health systems and all the partners we built doing this one thing, addressing mercury, they said, that was fantastic. Look at the amazing collective impact we had. What's next? We said, okay, well, now let's talk about the plastics that you use and the chemicals that you use in your facilities. Let's talk about the buildings. Can you build cancer centers without carcinogens? Can you build children's hospitals without chemicals linked to birth defects? Let's talk about the food that you serve that actually contributes to the very diseases you're solving for. Let's talk about your climate footprint. Let's talk about the water. Let's talk about the transportation. And over the course of 25 years, we built this enormous network now of thousands and thousands of hospitals and health systems and physician and nursing organizations and all sorts of multilateral organizations, all working on a broad agenda to detoxify the healthcare sector, to have them model the kind of transformation to a sustainable and just economy that we need for the planet. And so we've got partners in 72 countries and strategies with the UN agencies, et cetera, et cetera. And the transformation has gone for how can we do less harm? How can you take this Hippocratic oath to do no harm and address the climate footprint and the environmental footprint of healthcare? But more broadly, how can we leverage the healthcare sector's assets, its investments, its purchasing, its workforce development to actually be part of a much broader healing mission, to heal the communities that they serve and to heal the planet that sustains us all? How can we leverage that 18% of the US economy and 10% globally toward a much broader vision of collective healing? So that's 25 years in 5 minutes. The critical lessons that I want to share with you is this. We started with a kind of idea of a network mind. In other words, how do we build as many partners that have different parts of the ecosystem that have something to contribute to make this change possible? Because all the skills and expertise and connections don't exist in one organization. It's monolithic strategies are not that effective. So how can you consciously think about collaboration from the sense of that other people have gifts and strategies and expertise to bring to the party? Second is having shared goals. There's all sorts of partners in our network beyond not liking each other, like Russ talks about. They may be completely against each other on certain values and certain things, but if they have a shared goal, then everybody can focus on that shared goal and not about all the things that divide them. And then a path to that collective impact. So creating the path, saying, here's the roadmap that we're all traveling down toward. Now we're saying, how do we decarbonize the healthcare sector? How do we elevate healthcare professionals as messengers for climate and equity and global health? The third component is tools and guidances, developing strategies and tools so people can say, well, how do I do that? How do I make that change? How do I move toward renewable energy? How do I stop using anesthetic gases? How do I move from the overuse of meat produced with antibiotics to plant-based diets that are good for people and the planet? So creating tools and guidances along the way, and then peer-to-peer learning. Again, nobody has all the answers. So creating opportunities for people to come together and share with each other and accelerate and short circuit the learning curve, super, super important. So I'm sure Russ is going to replicate some of those components, but that's been our experience. The other thing I'll say is that just like Ashoka, I think the larger social entrepreneur field is going through a big evolution. When I got the Skoll Award for Social Entrepreneur in 2006, on one side of me was giving me the award was Ben Kingsley, and the other side was Robert Redford. So on one side I had Gandhi, and the other side was the Sundance Kid. A lot of pressure. And so I think what's happened in that network and is happening in the Ashoka network is it's not about the hero worship of an individual making change. It's even not about that person's organization, because people leave organizations. It's about the ecosystems that we build together for much more collective impact, which gets me to the last set of points, which is about leadership style. And so what does collaborative leadership look like? It's more of a circle. It's more of a feminine approach. It's not this sort of forceful male hero standing in front of the stage saying, here's what it's going to be. It's a circle. The great Buddhist Vietnamese philosopher and practitioner Thich Nhat Hanh says that the next Buddha will be a circle of people solving together, transforming together. And that gets me to the last point, which is that in my work and all of our work, if we just think about that all we are is this one ego, this one individual willing to try to change the world, it's really hard to do that. It's limiting, it's self-limiting by our own individual skin and personality and mindset. But if we see ourselves as vehicles for much broader transformation in the world, we have much more power. if we see ourselves as stepping into the river of justice, understanding that millions of people have come before us and millions of people will come after us when we're gone, it brings in so many more forces that the universe wants to heal. And I guess I want to encourage all of us to start to think of ourselves not only as change makers and social entrepreneurs, but as planetary healers. We're part of the largest social movement in the history of the world, and we need to act like we are. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Gary. It's just really powerful to hear your experience. I would be interested in learning from you about particular challenges that you face in doing these collaborations and what you have learned from that.
Yeah, some of the biggest challenges are that it requires a lot of patience. Because there's going to be, wherever we find ourselves, there's going to be enormous forces that are opposed to the work we're doing. In our case, it was the fossil fuel and petrochemical industries. They did not want us to detox the healthcare sector because the healthcare sector is one of the largest users of toxic chemicals. They represent in the United States, 10% of all the greenhouse gas emissions because they're running their hospitals and facilities on fossil fuels, and it's almost 5% globally. So by trying to detox healthcare, the chemical industry was trying to completely undercut us. And so we had to do all sorts of things to try to stop them every time they tried to bring in other forces to discredit us, including political forces like the former Surgeon General of the United States, or they tried to create their own network of nurses, not validating what we did. They had this guy write this op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. They called us health scare without shame, supposed to healthcare without harm. So there are all sorts of challenges because a lot of what we're trying to do is disrupt, as as the speaker said in the beginning, disruptive, broken systems. And yet those people who are running those broken systems are not given up easily. So that's one thing. And I think another challenge has been continuing to deepen our relationships with different institutions. Because if your relationship with a nursing association or a hospital is just, or whoever, is just with one person, what if that person leaves? Then you've lost that connection. So a lot of our approach has been how to deepen the connections, to have multi points of touch with the institutions that we're trying to change. So that's another one. Is it takes an enormous amount of follow-up, enormous amount of care and feeding of the network. It requires enormous amount of paying attention, not just to the ideas you're trying to build together, but to who these people are, their whole being, and understanding where they're coming from and speaking to that and hearing that and listening for that. So, I mean, there's a lot of different other challenges, but those are the ones that immediately come to mind.
Great, thank you. I cannot avoid this question about failure. What has been one of like those that important failure that really got you, and that what did you learn about it too?
Yeah, well, I would say I don't know, it's a failure. We're not there yet, is in this one thing that's so important, is that the climate crisis, until very, very recently, was basically seen as something that affected polar bears on melting ice caps and glaciers receding and things that were so far from people's experience in their daily lives. And I think we haven't gotten there yet, but it's to connect the climate crisis to people's lived experience, to the asthma that they face, to the extreme weather that they dealing with heat stress, with hurricanes, with tornadoes, with wildfires, with sea level rise, with air pollution that also exacerbates COVID. we haven't yet broken through so that when people think of the climate crisis, they think about the health of their families, and it's central. And that as we solve for getting off of our addiction for fossil fuels, we're actually going to help people's health. We're going to build a green economy, and we're going to solve the climate crisis at the same time. So it's not a failure, but I'm so impatient because the crisis is accelerating so fast that we need to break through in these consciousness. And I think the Ashoka Network is a perfect place to do that all over the world.
Thank you. And in terms of your own leadership, I mean, you've had over 35 years doing this work. What has happened in yourself? How has yourself evolved? And when you look at what is it that the type of leadership that you have to embody right now for these things to work, how does that look like? And what can you share with us about things that we can keep in mind to the extent that some of us, many of us, want to engage in this type of work?
Yeah. So a few things come to mind. One is recognizing what I'm good at. And doing those things, because we can't all be good at many things. You know, I'm not good with numbers. I'm not good with managing people. I'm good with strategizing. I'm good with being a spokesperson. So recognizing what you're good at, and then hiring and finding other people that have those other skills, as opposed to feeling you've got to do it all. And certainly not continue to do the thing that you're really not good at, because you're going to create a dysfunctional organization or by stepping into places that you're not good at. The second thing is really bringing up the next generation of people who are inspired to follow me, to building a broader movement, to having that be a very conscious strategy. It's like, where are young people coming that are on fire around the idea of leveraging and sustainable healthcare, and what does it mean to be a doctor or a nurse or an architect or a dietitian in this moment on the planet? How can they be broader healers for some much bigger vision? And then another one I'd say is not thinking small. And this gets back to the point, is that if I'm just this little Jewish guy from New Jersey, like, who am I to be, you know, trying to lead a global movement for sustainable healthcare? But if I am touching some deeper place in me, which is much more about being in this sort of great chain of being and touching a much more spiritual place in myself, then I have much, much more power, because it's not about me. It's about the vision. It's about the ancestors. It's about the power of spirit to transform the world. That's the biggest one. Great.
Thank you so much. Something that we've seen in Ashoka, and sometimes we talk about it, and particularly about some of the social entrepreneurs, is how we can all connect with that which is larger than us, but still contain us, and how is it that we can all dance together to be able to contribute to that unfolding. So very inspiring. Thank you. I would like to move ahead and ask Ross and Heather to share more about your work, your experience, patterns, all the juicy things. So we can also then after open up for more questions and learn more from you all, and your comments in the chat, please. So Ross and Heather, welcome, and please go ahead.
Thanks, Lizette. Thanks, Gary. You're an inspiration. I'm hoping you're seeing some slides here. You're going to hear from Russ in just a moment. My name's Heather Equinas with Co-Creative. This is a little bit about who we are and what we do. The simple version is that we're a systems change consultancy, and we help design and launch different network-based collaborations to solve various complex and systemic challenges. And, you know, we're a bit agnostic about the specific types of challenges we take on, but in general, all the work we do falls into two general categories of building shared prosperity and also ecological sustainability. So we wanted to share a few examples of different kinds of networks that we support. These are just a few examples. we're currently supporting over 21 different collaborations, and all of these networks involve both companies and NGOs. Some of them have governmental agencies that are part of them, or academics, and worker representative groups, or many different kinds of stakeholders. So we're going to go deeper into the story of one of these networks that you see on the screen, the Clean Electronics Production Network, in just a few minutes. First, though, we wanted to share a simple framework that we think of in terms of supporting collaborations, particularly multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral collaborations. And we've referred to it as the CALM, or CALM agendas. So the first agenda is about connecting people and trusting relationships. And so this is where Gary's comments around thinking about collaboration as a circle was resonating with me. This is really about needing to attend to building relationships based on trust and connection across people in a change system or collaboration, and really helping people connect at that heart level. The next agenda that we attend to in supporting collaborations is around aligning. And so this is about aligning a collaboration around a really clear and powerful shared intent. And it's where we feel the work often at that spirit level. Because we're connected with something, again, as Gary spoke to, that's greater than us, right? That's includes us, and it's beyond us. In terms of a third agenda, which is around learning, it's been our experience that collaboration, or a group of people who might not have a lot in common, the only way that they can really agree on what's most essential to focus on in terms of solutions or interventions in a system is once they've been able to collectively see a whole picture of that system together. And so this particular agenda that we attend to is really connected to our heads or our minds, right? And supporting people in getting to a place of shared understanding. And then the final agenda that in the framework that we attend to, again, to support collaborations, is around making. And so it's been our experience that sometimes this is the place where collaborations can fall short or not attend to. But really, we found that, for people to stay in it in the long haul, we really need to be using our hands to build, to test, and to implement real interventions and solutions that are going to make an impact for people on the ground. And so obviously this agenda is really connected to our hands. So next up, we really wanted to share 5 different success factors connected to each one of these agendas and go deeper on the story of the Clean Electronics Production Network. So we have found that changing complex and entrenched systems is not easy. It takes a lot of resources, both financial and time. It takes a lot of deep commitment. So one way that people tend to manage all that complexity and difficulty is to establish a really doable goal, something that's really feasible. And unfortunately, after having done that, we have often found that after a lot of doctoring and negotiating, we've ended up with sort of a lowest common denominator goal for collaborations. It's the one that everyone could agree to. And sometimes we've rationalized this by sort of asserting that it's a good place to get started, and we'll expand the goal as, our appetite for change expands over time. And the problem with this is that we have found a weak goal tends to lead to sort of a lack of energy or gut level commitment to the work. And so if a goal isn't powerful, it isn't compelling, it's like, why collaborate in the first place? It takes time, resources. And so we've really found that only a powerful, a meaningful goal can compel people to stay at the table and work through all the complexity and all the mess together. So at an industry or larger levels of systems that, usually means that a goal is one that no single company or organization could really accomplish alone. So if you look at these examples, you can see that if you look at the Clean Electronics Production Network one, the time that this goal was set, there are about 18 million workers in the global electronics supply chain using thousands of different chemical compounds. And so even a senior leader at Apple, the world's largest company by market cap at that time, said, look, we know this is an issue and we're working on it internally, but we cannot possibly solve this alone. We really need other companies at the table to be able to work on this and to achieve this. So a powerful and really a game-changing goal, it's not just a good thing, it really forces us to think differently and act differently. It pushes us to sort of let go of assumptions or preferred solutions to deal with the complex and systemic nature of the challenges that are ahead of us. So if you're really facing a truly complex and systemic challenge, our experience tells us that we need to really craft a goal that's meaningful, it's audacious, it's as specific as possible, and it's time bound as if possible. And then start to spiral out. And as Gary described in his experience with healthcare without harm, find other leaders in that system who are ready to work on the goal with you. So the second success factor for systems change collaborations that we wanted to speak to was around requisite variety. So one of the problems that we've often seen in industry-led collaborations in particular is a real lack of variety of who's in the room. And so we don't just mean, though it's important, sort of diverse representation in terms of race and gender. We are also talking about variety in terms of roles, experiences, and perspectives that are part of that wider system. And so, if you're addressing a workers' rights issue, then how many worker representatives are in your group? And do they feel safe enough if we created a container that enables them to say what they really think? But what we've seen in collaboration, and especially complex challenges, like doing that work is hard enough. And so there can be this reluctance to sort of make it even harder by sort of letting in all this divergence and all this difference into the room. And we get it, it's frustrating to have to work with people that we can't relate to or might not share our values. Our response to all that is pretty simple. It's like if your change system doesn't reflect the complexity of the larger system you're working to change, then your efforts will fail. So it's likely that you'd be back in 2 or 10 years addressing the same challenges again, restarting from the same places. So once you've drafted that powerful goal, then for us, the next question is, who has a stake in achieving it? And that's usually going to be much bigger and much more diverse than just our industry peers, for example. So, we've also found that it's not just enough to convene folks, diverse groups, and get them all in a room. We really need to be willing to share the airtime, open up the aperture, and sort of tap into the collective wisdom of all that difference. And it's not easy to do, but really with thoughtful process design and good facilitation, we found that it works. And so for clean electronics, it's really meant that we're actively including worker advocacy and campaign organizations at the table, and that they're working alongside of brands and factory owners to develop the analysis of what's not working, co-design solutions that will. And earlier this year, it also meant several NGO stakeholder consultation sessions happened around the world to even more deeply consult with diverse stakeholders on analysis, on progress, and on potential solutions. So when we consider who needs to be at the table in multi-stakeholder collaboration, a suggestion we have is that whenever possible, start with more diversity, not less, in your collaborations.
Hi, everyone. I'm Russ. I'm going to pick up the baton from Heather here. And what you're seeing on the screen here is actually part of a system landscape map. In this case, this is a map that's on a wall in one of Apple's conference rooms. And it was there during the launch session of the Clean Electronics Production Network. About 90 stakeholder interviews were done to build this map. And it basically has every key factor and key dynamic related to worker exposures to hazardous chemicals in the electronic supply chain. So of course it has things like regulation, enforcement, et cetera, but also has financial incentives and disincentives for factory purchasing managers, availability of green chemistry substitutions, PPE use, which now is a term that we all seem to know the definition of. And so there's a lot in this map. And I have to tell you, it took 3 hours for that group of stakeholders to digest that map. We had distilled down the insights from a bunch of stakeholder interviews, but we wanted people to be overwhelmed by that complexity. Because even though many of them had been working on this issue for decades, they still had very siloed views of what was actually happening in this system, where the leverage points were for powerful change. They had different recommendations for where we should focus, what we should do, what was going to, quote, solve the problem or not. And so our part of our intent here was to overwhelm the group, because that's the point at which the people in the room started to let go of those biases and assumptions and favored solutions, because they truly became present to the complexity in the system. Now, as Heather said, all the people in that room were there around a powerful goal that they had committed to. And so this overwhelm was bounded by and directed by this powerful shared intent that was keeping people in that analysis together. And I think too often our analysis of these complex systemic challenges, it's too reductionist, it's too limited, it's too simplistic. It's often done by some expert or leader kind of in a siloed way. So that thinking behind the strategy is not being socialized and tested, and most importantly, owned by other key leaders in that system. So our advice in this is, or our suggestion is, face and embrace the overwhelming complexity and engage others in coming face to face with that complexity as well, because that's the point at which they start to let go, truly face that complexity head on, and then they can co-create solutions together because they're sharing that picture of what's happening in that system. There's no silver bullet to transform the way complex systems work. And I think the conventional thinking for many years has been that there are magical keys in systems, some solution or some intervention that's somehow going to fundamentally shift a system toward a better state. But you can imagine trying to achieve the goal of the Clean Electronics Production Network of eliminating worker exposures to hazardous chemicals in the global electronic supply chain through, for example, policy change alone. It just won't work. And any truly transformational change in any complex system is going to require a mix of interventions that will include policy in many cases. I think usually it's going to include, in many cases, changes in market dynamics or technology and or education, and even cultural and mindset changes, which I think are the most difficult of all to affect in the system. So for clean electronics, that's meant developing and actively managing a solutions portfolio of sorts. So you see things there like on-site chemical testing technology, the process chemicals data collection tool, which was just launched, I think, month before last. And in this case, this is the first time electronics manufacturers are reporting their proprietary chemical and PPE use data into a shared database. And that data set, which is now run by a third-party organization, Responsible Business Alliance, basically is going to allow the network to identify those hotspot risk areas and factories around the world so they can more strategically focus their attention and resources on those areas with greatest risk. You'll also see something that's coming online later this month. A number of the corporate members of Clean Electronics are announcing the Towards Zero Exposure Commitment Program, where they're going to go public with their commitments to collectively eliminate the most harmful chemicals. They've identified 10 highly carcinogenic, highly hazardous chemicals that they're going to commit to eliminating worker exposures to publicly. So I think when it comes to this idea of requisite action, the question is, will our interventions, if brought to scale, actually achieve our goal? And if not, then let's go back to the drawing board and figure out what is the mix of solutions that are really going to be required to achieve our goal. And finally, there's a question of time frame. And I think if you want to drive systemic change, we need to think in decades, not months or even years. So another network, the Solar Circle, was formed in 2002, and they developed a goal of having 50% of global energy supply come from solar photovoltaics or other solar technologies by the year 2050. So to do that, they've shifted energy and tax policies in several countries. They've shepherded major technological breakthroughs in solar tech. They've brought online new production facilities for silicon that's dedicated for use in solar, a bunch of different interventions that they've done over the past 18 years. But that was against a goal that they hope to achieve by the year 2050. When they formed that goal in 2004, global energy supply from solar was less than the output of one medium-sized nuclear power plant. So it was a huge challenge, but they basically said, this is going to be an intergenerational commitment on our part, and they're still meeting. They're still actively working together every year. Now they're working on things like grid pricing and grid policy to enable the continued growth of renewables on the grid, battery storage technology, things like that. So what you see on the screen here is from Clean Electronics, much younger collaboration. But this was a backcasting exercise we did in 2017 around the question of, okay, let's start with the 10 most hazardous chemicals. How might we eliminate exposures to those chemicals within 8 years? And essentially, this map is their roadmap to do that. But they weren't pretending that that was something that they could achieve in a year or 2 or 3. It's a massive challenge. You're talking about a system with 18 million workers using thousands of different chemicals and chemical compounds. So we know that many funders, many change makers are into innovating quickly, moving fast to get early wins. There's a lot of value in that. And systemic problems don't give a damn about our urgency or our timelines. So I think we're encouraging folks to think about when we're setting out on these big systems change goals, of which, by the way, we're trying to change systems that have developed into their current state over decades, in some cases centuries. Make sure that your time frame that you're committing to and others are committing to is a time frame that fits with, that's requisite for the goal you're trying to achieve. So Lou, I think we're back to you.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Ross and Heather, for sharing. It was very concrete and clear, which is great. We've been receiving some questions from our audience. I will start with the first one, and it's more around asking you, Ross, to expand a little bit on your comment about mindset shift that is needed, and how does that play a role in creating these collaborations?
Well, I would say that's foundational. Now, that doesn't mean that we always go directly for mindset shift, because sometimes people will shift their mindsets as they adopt new behaviors. And I think, Gary, you had that happen where hospitals were becoming aware of their role in basically distributing toxic materials through landfills into waterways and into people's bodies, including the bodies of children that they were treating. Gary got them to adopt policies and enact behaviors. And over time, that collection of commitments and behaviors that they were making started to create deeper awareness and a shift in mindsets about the fundamental role of healthcare. Are we just here to provide clinical services and charge money for those? Or are we here to advance the total health of the communities that we're serving? So I think it's foundational. It doesn't mean that we always go straight at mindset shift.
Get it. And for the three of you, whoever wants to answer this question is, how do you manage egos and fears?
I think there's I'll just say one thing, there's a social technology set of skills. And I think Russ and Heather have it very, very well developed, which is facilitating meetings and facilitating groups is a real social technology skill. Not everybody can facilitate a meeting. And so creating a democratization of participation is a skill set. Understanding when people are coming with their own personal traumas and have that play out in a group is super important, because it really just takes one or two people to really disrupt the resonance of a group. And I think, creating that shared grounding of connection, trust, helps the resonance of the group go up dramatically. I just would say those things. Russ and Heather probably have other things.
Well, there are so many ways we do that. I like that the question put ego and fear together, because often the ego kicks in response to fear. And also the ego kicks in when people don't feel like they've really been heard. And so when we do something like the landscape map that we showed you there for clean electronics, everybody in the room saw their truth and their perspective reflected somewhere on that map. And then they saw that it was part of a much bigger, much more complex picture. And so they got their ego kind of addressed by seeing their information on the map, and it put their perspective into perspective.
Thank you. I am conscious of the time, so I will put some questions together that we received separately. And so when looking at your model, Ross and Heather, how do you scale your solutions using that approach? But also, what can we do to make the change last and get really owned by the actors of the system?
I would take the second one first. For me, it's the process of co-creation together is what builds ownership. And so that's why for us, it's important that we're bringing a sort of a fractal of the wider system together that's part of that makes up the collaboration. And so what gets produced from the analysis to the shifts to the specific solutions, we are co-designing those together. And as Gary referenced, in a very democratized way. And so that to me is building a more powerful change system that's affecting the system we want to change.
I would add just quickly that, we think about it as being kind of the Intel chip inside of a system, so that it doesn't have to be done in our name. Healthcare without harm could be invisible, but as the leaders in our situation, as the leaders in healthcare own this agenda, it's our business. Our business is to take care of communities. Our business is to align with the planet's health as essential to people's health. If we do that, then we've inserted a kind of part of the DNA of this planetary health framework into the future of healthcare. And it's the same thing for what they've been talking about electronics, is inserting a mindset around workers' health and planetary health into the way electronics are produced. Then all the creativity can be unleashed on how to get there.
Also, Lou, there's a key pattern in systems change around spiraling. and Gary spoke to it in his examples, of not everyone needs to be directly involved in a systems change collaboration. So some people are going to be very deep engagement, kind of co-creating the analysis and the strategy. They're going to spiral out to collaborate with more people in that larger system, engaging them in the analysis and solutioning, et cetera. Some other people are just going to be consulted. Some other people, most of the system is just going to receive signals about what's shifting. So with Solar Circle, there were only 50 people at a time in Solar Circle, but they were a group that was selected for their influence with key constituencies like policymakers, like industry, et cetera. And so they were sending signals out. And one of the funny examples is when they were looking at renewable energy incentives in Congress in the US, they had a bunch of testimony in favor of it. And many of the people testifying were members of Solar Circle. And yet it sounded like, oh, there's a person from industry. There's a person from the National Renewable Energy Lab. There's a person, right? So there was a very diverse group testifying, but they had all prepared their testimony together.
Thank you, Russ, and thank you everyone for being here. It's been really inspiring and action-oriented. Actually, I have a few things that I can start implementing already. We have a few more questions, but we don't have enough time. So my invitation to you all is to check out Ashoka and Co-Creative's resources. We are adding the links in the chat. Florian will do that. Co-Creative offers workshops that you can access also in their website. And for connections and collaborations with Ashoka, we will also put our information here on our Fellowship Europe in our website of Ashoka. So thank you all for being here. It's been a pleasure, and keep enjoying the rest of the sessions.